was not turning out the way he thought it would. And that was an understatement. His father died when he was in his early 20s, and after having to take over the family business, the young man who had dreamed of travel, adventure, making a name for himself, had instead been confined to his hometown. It was a tiny place, the sort of town where everybody knew everybody, and he found himself in the midst of the typical trajectory. He fell in love with the girl he had known since childhood, gotten married, had a few children, and now was a working man struggling to pay the bills. The family business had done a lot of good for the townsfolk over the years, but it had never exactly been lucrative. And then one day, tragedy struck. An employee made a massive banking error, which threw the man into a tailspin. His company's shareholders would be absolutely furious. One day, he couldn't take it anymore, and he began to consider taking his own life. Has anyone heard this story before, perhaps? All right, I see a few hands. Okay, if you think you have, hang on to that thought as I tell you another story. This one is of a young boy. He grows up in a family with a very loving mother and father and a younger brother who is friend and playmate. He has a close-knit group of friends whom he has the blessing of growing up with, because his family never moves away from their small hometown. It's a beautiful little town, the sort of place where everyone looks out for one another, seeing each other through whatever life throws their way, including when World War II strikes. The boy grows up, and despite having no college education, receives a job in the family business right out of high school, working his way up to being the president of the company. He realizes a great love for the sweetest girl in town, who also happens to be exceptionally beautiful, lucky them. They have 4 very happy children, healthy every one, minus the occasional cold on Christmas Eve. They don't have a lot of money, but they live in a very large house and always have enough food. Life was not turning out exactly the way he thought it would, but it wasn't so bad either. Does any of this ring a bell for more of you by any chance? How many people think they know what I'm talking about? All right, I see some hands. This is great. The 2 stories are one and the same, albeit told from slightly different angles. Not angels, but angles. For those of you who need a few more hints, here are a few. A pool hidden under a school gymnasium, an angel named Clarence. The town of Bedford Falls, Zuzu's petals. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. What wonderful story am I talking about here?
It's a Wonderful Life.
There we go, yep. It's a Wonderful Life, Frank Capra's 1946 classic about a man named George Bailey, an average Joe who has a not-so-average Christmas Eve one year. So, true confessions, It's a Wonderful Life is my all-time favorite movie. Not just Christmas, all time. It was the focus of my 25-page capstone research paper for my film studies minor in college. It is something I could talk about all day long. I love this movie. I know its trivia, its background stories, its camera angles, the selection of the cast, even who from the cast is still alive. I know a lot about this film. It's beautifully crafted, it's iconic. And a few years ago, I even went to the It's a Wonderful Life Festival, which, for those who are not in the know, occurs in Seneca Falls, New York every December. It brings together the child actors who are still alive from the film. We dine on Ma Bailey's food, drink Christmas libations from Martini's bar. There is a picture of Bedford Falls in my office right now, and I have a copy of Capra's, of the original Christmas card that It's a Wonderful Life came from, The Greatest Gift, written by one Philip Van Doren Stern. And I have a copy of Capra's novel, too, signed by his charming granddaughter from that event 2 years ago. So, if any of you are interested, I really like this movie, in case you couldn't tell, and I'd be happy to talk about this at any time. And yet, here's one little bit of tidbit trivia for you. It's a Wonderful Life was a major flop in the box office. It failed to garner a single Oscar at the Academy Awards, despite several nominations. Much like George Bailey himself, the life of the film did not exactly turn out the way Capra and the others thought it might. Its popularity came much, much later through a single clerical error. Back in the 20th century, a film was protected under copyright law for 28 years. But that copyright could be extended another 28 for a nominal fee. You have a sense where this is going, right? In 1974, the pencil pusher in charge of renewing the copyrights to It's a Wonderful Life did not pay the fee, thus allowing it to become public domain. So of course, TV stations jumped at the chance to put a film in their lineups for free, and thus, long before marathons of A Christmas Story made our television screens, audiences around the world enjoyed It's a Wonderful Life over and over and over again for 20 years, until a loophole came into existence in the 90s that put a stop to that copyright misfire. So that's a separate story for another day. I really could go on and on about this movie, but it certainly bears noting that just like the life cycle of this film, George Bailey's life did not turn out the way he thought it would. The same could be said for the priest Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. Life did not turn out the way they thought it would. The couple had hoped for a child. Years after trying to become pregnant had yielded them nothing but disappointment and heartache. This is a story that many can relate to today. It's the story of test after test, of repeat visits to doctors, of negative pregnancy tests filling the trash can next to tissues soaked with tears. For those who walk the road of infertility, the pain is overwhelming. And this time of year, it bears noting, can be really, really triggering. Its constant focus on unexpected pregnancies and surprise babies. Zechariah and Elizabeth have walked this road, and they believe it's too late for them. Then the angel Gabriel appears, and much as he does to Mary, tells Elizabeth and Zechariah that the impossible has happened. Elizabeth is pregnant and will bear a son to be named John. And not only that, but John will become a prophet of great importance for the entire people of Israel. Rightly so, Zechariah's first response is one of total incredulity. Gabriel, are you sure you have the right house? Elizabeth and I are old. How can I believe you? Clarence comes down and says to George, I'm your guardian angel, and George's response, after looking at him, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Zechariah's reward for expressing doubt is that he's rendered mute, and for the entirety of his wife's pregnancy. This is not exactly the way he thought life would go. I can't help but wonder what it would be like to be mute for 9 months. This has always seemed like a rather harsh punishment to me. Had I been Zechariah, I would have been furious to have received such a sentence for merely stating the obvious. We are not young, Gabriel. What are you talking about? While his wife was undergoing 9 months of pregnancy, what would that have been like? Perhaps month 1 saw Zechariah stewing, or even railing against God in his head, making what noise he could by stomping around his home. Months 2 and 3 might have been a little bit of brooding in a forced, sullen silence, being unable to express an opinion, or confess to a twinge of fear about his impending fatherhood, or talk to his child in utero. What's more, Zechariah was a priest. I cannot imagine serving a community or carrying out ministerial duties while not being able to utter a single sound. And even worse, that the being rendered mute was a direct response from the God he was serving. So the muting story is very interesting here. Scripture tells us that when Gabriel appeared, Zechariah was ministering at the altar of incense. For those who aren't super brushed up on Jesus' time period and various priestly duties, this was not any ordinary task. The altar of incense was a special, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. One priest's name would be chosen for this honor, and after being chosen once, that name was never put into the hat again. This was a very, very special service, once in a lifetime. So Zechariah is preparing for this incredible event in his life, and then he is told by Gabriel, life is not going the way you thought it would. Here's a new direction. He is rendered mute. He emerges from preparing for this task And tradition says that he was supposed to give those who had gathered a blessing right in that moment. Everyone waits for it with bated breath, and he cannot speak. This would be like standing up to defend your thesis, years and years of hard work, and being rendered unable to speak. Or like a movie you were sure would succeed, ending up being a total flop. What a difficult turn for Zechariah's soul. His life is not going the way he thought it would. Much like my love for It's a Wonderful Life, I've always been partial to Zechariah because our son Zach is named in part after Zechariah. This is also God's joke on us because Zach is anything but mute, but I digress. The root of the Hebrew name Zechariah is the Hebrew zakar, which means God remembers. Now, zakar is not God saying, oh yeah, I forgot to turn off the coffee pot this morning. Zakar has a richer connotation than that. In the word of one commentator, zakar is to employ your hands, feet, and lips to engage in whatever action that remembrance requires. To paraphrase, zakar is full-bodied attention-giving, full-bodied remembrance. God zakars us. God gives us every ounce of God's loving focus. And few things teach us better about zakar, about giving attention, than silence. You may remember this from one of my first sermons with all of you, The Gift of Silence. And it makes me wonder if Zechariah's silence is less punishment and more opportunity. After undergoing a stage of silent brooding about what God did to him, does Zechariah's spirit finally get quiet, attentive? Does he hear the other children playing in town and realize, oh, this is what I have to look forward to? Does he hear Elizabeth's aches and groans, and instead of dismissing them, does he become watchful of her in a different, more loving way? This is the way of suffering with, of compassion, which many of us in this room are well acquainted with. When we struggle with something, it opens up two doors within our spirits. The first is the door of compassion. We know another's sorrow because we have lived our own. Even if not the same sorrow, there is that connection. We know another's demons because we have stared our own square in the eye. We know another's struggle because we have been brave enough to stop distracting ourselves with shiny things or busy things and instead sit with our own. Those who have suffered an agonizing loss, those who struggle with addiction, those who know their shadow selves that show up in depression and anxiety, suicidal ideation. Those who have lived to tell this tale have undergone quite the transformation. They are mentors and guides for others. They are the Elizabeths who welcome in their much younger, also pregnant cousin Mary with open arms, granting her hospitality and hope and perspective and eyes to see the exciting things happening, even if they are very unexpected. And they are the Zechariahs, called to zakar, to remember others in the way that God remembers us, with hands and feet and lips and spirit willing to engage with care and love. Suffering opens up a second door, the first being compassion, the second, joy. And it is a door that Zechariah throws open with both arms as he is able to proclaim Gabriel was right. When he is able to speak, he says, God has remembered me and blessed me with the joy of a son. God says his name is John, and thus it shall be. His lips are opened. 9 months after he was supposed to deliver it in his priestly role, we receive his blessing. His glorious song is aptly named the Benedictus, or blessing, because that is the first word he utters. Interestingly, this song is the only father-son lullaby in the Bible. It's both tenderly crafted for a beloved newborn, and it's also sung to give hope and joy to an entire nation of people. After being silenced by his fear for 9 long months, what Zechariah gives birth to is an abundant overflow of both compassion and joy. This is George Bailey in the climactic scenes in the movie. After having been visited by his own angel, after sitting with the despair of his own choices, in which he lives in a world where he never existed, he can stand it no longer. He runs across town back to the bridge where his despair and fear had nearly overtaken him. A bridge between two worlds of life lived in despair and life lived in joy. Take me back. I don't care what happens to me. Take me back to my wife and kids. I want to live again. I want to live again. Please, God, let me live again. And then it starts to snow. God opens up his eyes and his lips and his hands and his feet, and his joy and compassion erupt from him. He slips and slides and races around town in a state of absurd jubilation. He sees townspeople and greets them with hugs and shouts and excitement. Even Mr. Potter gets a Merry Christmas. He squeezes his kids to within an inch of their lives. He kisses several times over the broken post on the staircase in a moment that reveals pure joy like few other scenes in the entire canon of filmmaking, in my obviously so humble opinion. All that once seemed mundane is now perfect bliss. Life did not turn out the way he thought it would, and the man who once saw his life as a downer now sees it as a deep blessing, a changed man. It really is a wonderful story. And it took several decades and a wild plot of copyright craziness that not even Hollywood could make up for us to realize it. So friends, a question for you this morning. What is God wishing to birth in you? What is your spirit serving as the incubator for right now? Is it a sense of perspective to know that life is not as you hoped it would be, but also knowing that that is not the end of the story? Is it a growing sense that even in the darkness of this, at times very dark, very painful world, the sense that the candle of joy flickers on even when the cold air threatens to blow it out? Is it a sense that God zakars you, that God remembers you too, and wishes joy for you? Is God birthing compassion within you, causing you to bring joy to another? Are you becoming a sort of person who can welcome in someone who might themselves be in a time of brooding or fear or anger? Lord knows we need more of that welcome in this world. Whatever it is for you, it might take time to grow within you. But even so, you're in good company. George Bailey spent over 3/4 of the film's duration in near anonymity and misery, and Elizabeth grew a whole baby while Zechariah sat in silence. A message of joy for the world formulating in our hearts very slowly. Joy takes time to emerge. Advent is a long season of waiting, whereas Christmas is much shorter. It's a blink of an eye. And yet God zakars us through it all, choosing to bear joy through us into this world. May we all remember that when the magical snow stops falling or when the world goes silent. There is more to come. Stay tuned as more candles are lit, as we journey closer to the star, as we get ever closer to the manger, the source of joy for all the world. Stay the course. There is yet more to come. In the name of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit.